This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. The date is October the 7th, 1971. I'm at the home of Rolland Kerns of Oklahoma City. We will be visiting about Mr. Kerns' background and particularly about the area of his career. Mr. Kerns is a retired treasurer and financial vice president of the Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company and was with this company for well over 40 years. He was also the secretary of the Southwest Atomic Energy Associates and later the organization C4, which we will ask him about, both dealing with experimental efforts in atomic development, and particularly in the generation. Rolland, I wondered to begin with, before we will talk rather than straight chronologically, we will start with the C4 and then with the OG&E, and then we'll go into other things in your background. But to begin with, why don't you give just a brief background of yourself, who your parents were, your mother is, and your where they came from, when and where you were born, and your wife's maiden name. This will give us personal background.
All right, Penn, thank you. My wife's maiden name was Looper, and she was born in Weber's Falls, Indian Territory, and that pretty well dates her. But I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and came to St. Louis from there, basically, and then came to Oklahoma in 1920. Came to Oklahoma City first, and then to Muskogee. And then I came back to Oklahoma City in 1938, and have been here ever since.
Can you give... now, your mother lives in Muskogee now, is that correct?
That's right.
And what was tell me about your father, what his occupation was, and...
Well, my father was the manager of the Beatrice Creamery in St. Louis, and then later at Muskogee formed his own association, the Southern Butter Company. My mother, who is going on 95 years old, will be 95 in March, lives at Muskogee, Oklahoma in the Kate Frank Manor.
I understand from another person at Kate Frank that she is the favorite individual at Kate Frank Manor also. I wonder if we could go into the atomic energy to begin with, and let's talk about to begin with the conception of atomic energy for generation as it was conceived here in Oklahoma. I know that that atomic energy has moved faster than the people in the electric energy at one time thought it was going to. And I wonder if you might discuss the beginning of the planning for atomic energy.
That's correct, and it has moved very rapidly. First, I might say that the reason for all the activity in atomic energy and the concept is the fact that depending on whom you listen to, the fossil fuel supplies will last only between 50 and 150 years. However, Oklahoma is richly endowed, as you know, with gas, oil, and coal. And as a matter of fact, studies indicate that Oklahoma alone has coal supplies that would last the United States at the present rate of consumption about 100 years or more. However, as you also know, the use of electric power is doubling each 8 to 10 years, and so these supplies will not last as long as the reserves indicate. And therefore, we were in the early 1950s getting questionnaires from the government and from the trade organization, the Edison Electric Institute, asking what we were doing in the nature of making investigations into the use of atomic power for generation, nuclear fission as it's technically called. And at first, we were involved only with the activities of the Edison Electric Institute in their pursuit of suitable measures, because in this area, gas particularly, and oil and coal also, are so cheap and in such abundant supplies that there was not nearly the pressure on us to find a supply, and also the justification of the spending of the immense amounts of money that were required would not be justified either to our stockholders or to the company itself, either one. And so at length, I was most surprised, and it was quite a shock to me that on an early morning in April, when I came to work, the president of the company informed me that I was to go to Little Rock with two of the vice presidents that morning, and I didn't even know what I was going for until I got on the plane, and one of the men gave me the proposed constitution and proposed bylaws of an organization to be named the Southwest Atomic Energy Associates, and I was told to digest them on the way over to Little Rock. Well, about all I could do was read them over a couple of times before we got there, and when I arrived, the meeting was composed of about 15 utilities, including OG&E, and even more surprisingly, I was elected the secretary of the organization. From that stemmed a very immediate investigation of possibilities for experimentation, and in Chicago, that following June, just before the Edison Electric Institute, we interviewed the Atomics International division of North American Airways. Yes, and after there, I remember there was several well-known people at that meeting, and the hardest working one, I suppose, was Gordon Evans, the president of Kansas Gas and Electric Company at the time, who drove a real hard bargain with these people. And this was for the, I'll read from the annual report of 1957, just a little bit here, and this will give you a little background. As a matter of fact, it's my words, so I don't have any hesitation in plagiarizing, you might say. In June of 1957, your company joined with 14 other electric companies of this region and formed Southwest Atomic Energy Associates, a nonprofit organization. The purpose is to conduct research and experimentation for the development of an epithermal thorium breeder reactor as a means to generate electricity with nuclear energy. This project will cost the 15 companies more than $5 million and will require about 4 years of work. The company's portion of the cost is estimated to be $730,000. The contract has been let for Atomics International, a subsidiary of North American Aviation Incorporated, to conduct the development, and all the member companies of the Southwest Atomic Energy Associates deem this project to be the utmost importance to their future operations and to the customers that they serve.
Now, they had they built a plant or built an experimental
That's what
thing at Cayuga?
No,
Okay.
it was up in the Santa Susana Mountains near Los Angeles. Let me look here just a moment now. Shortly thereafter, under the direction of Dr. Chauncey Starr, who was the vice president of Atomics International and really a true genius, and Dr. Don Egan, who was the supervisor of our contract and also a noted man. He had given many papers at Geneva in the World Conference of Nuclear Power, as well as in Milan and Rome, and several other well-known scientists at the time. A laboratory was built in the Santa Susana Mountains, just northwest of Los Angeles at the same site that the Rocketdyne properties were located, and we heard the experimentation of the rockets that eventually sent men into space. It was a huge roar, and you no doubt heard them on the television as our men blasted off, but it was at the same location. And this experimentation continued for about 2 years, and during this period we would have to go out and attend meetings out there. The first critical test was made on December 13th of 1960, and it was successful in that it was a self-sustained fission, which was the thing that was of first importance. And then the question arose as to whether this would be practical from the standpoint of economy, especially in our area, because we had to justify it against our own cost of fuel, even though the fuel would eventually become exhausted. At first, the men were a little skeptical of the entire project, and there were grumblings among some of them that maybe someone would like to pull out. However, their names were on the contract, and they could not do so without the permission of all the others. Well, this arrangement went on for several years, and it became the duty of the secretary and the treasurer to make audits of the costs. And we had one advantage because they were also doing work for the United States government at the same time for one of their atomic energy plants, and so we had the advantage of having certain of these items verified with the government before we went in. However, it did afford us a chance to become well acquainted with the people of that area and the scientists out there, and also gave us a little trip down to Mexico, to Tijuana, and I saw my first and I can assure you, my last bullfight while I was down there. I don't want to see any more of those, but we did have quite a few interesting side advantages from this. However, as the project proceeded, the experiment was a little disappointing, and there was not deemed by most of the directors enough benefit in this particular project to warrant going ahead with the thing, even though it was to take 4 years to do it. At the end of the second year, under the contract, we notified Atomics International that we were not going to pursue the epithermal thorium reactor any farther, but we're going to advertise for bids on a new project and a new concept, and they, along with about 5 others, including General Electric, were asked to bid on a new concept.
Why did you choose the thorium to begin with?
Well, this was the one that was recommended to us by Atomics International. We, at first, did not know, and at that time there was not an awful lot known about nuclear fission, and the scientists out there had come up with this theory, the physics theory, that it would sustain nuclear fission, which it proved to do. However, the economy of the thing was against it, and we could not justify going ahead with the indicated costs that there were going to be in this particular concept.
What's been the fate of the epithermal theory since you all got that?
I believe that that has been abandoned in favor of more economical methods of fishing. But anyway, after the bids had been led and they had been gone over thoroughly, General Electric's was accepted as being the most encouraging and the most promising of all the concepts. And this was known as the C4 project, which stands for Southwest Experimental Fast Oxide Reactor. I'll talk a little bit more of that later. But
swing back, if you don't mind me interrupting. Who were some of the people that, in other words, somebody worked up this original contract and these original things, who took the lead in getting it started?
You mean of the companies?
Yes.
Yes, well, the originators of the organization, I would have to say, were Don Kennedy of our company and Bob Ritchie, now passed on with our president of Arkansas Power and Light, Gordon Evans of Kansas Gas and Electric Company, and Bill Turner of the Louisiana Power and Light Company. And they are the ones that spearheaded it and got the others interested in it, because it was very apparent that if we did not do something on our own, the government was going to force us to do something as individuals. But the idea of this was that together, the 15 companies could do what not any single one of them could do financially otherwise. And it has proved out to be this way. Shall I go ahead now with it? All right. The General Electric Company, after they were given the contract, immediately started construction of the project on a 620-acre site over near Fayetteville, Arkansas. Now, I say by construction, what they did was dig a hole about 60 feet deep, and I've forgotten how far across it was, but it was it was a huge thing. I saw it, and as soon as they got that dug, they were informed by the Atomic Energy Commission that they could not pour a foot of concrete until after they had the project cleared by the AEC. The AEC held hearings at Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I was permitted to attend the initial day of these hearings, and it was a typical, I must say, and I'm not being facetious when I say it, it was a typical government project. And all the useless expenditures and the ramifications that go along with the feather-bedded government project. They did, I must say, do it very thoroughly, but so thoroughly that everybody connected with it got disgusted before it was over there. They had all the people in from the city of Fayetteville, from the state of Arkansas, and all other interested parties, and they were interested in whether the contamination from the plant would affect the orchards or the eggs that were produced in the area, or the poultry itself, or the fruits and vegetables, of which there's, as you know, a huge variety near Fayetteville. And after they kept Bob Welsh, who was the president of the organization, the president also of Southwestern Electric Power at Shreveport. They kept him there cooling his heels for 3 days while they had these hearings. And every word that was said by either him or the General Electric scientists or the government inquirers, or you might call them a little harsher names than that, was taken down on recordings, and not one, but they had 2 recordings going all the time, and as soon as one man's tape was about to wash out, a third would come in and sit down and get a duplicate transcript until his tape ran out, so that they had 2 at all times, even though they were having to change tapes, and so there wasn't a word lost. They also required the project to build a huge tower. I think it was about 100 feet in height, and make tests showing what would happen on certain days if the area became contaminated, which is highly improbable in one of these projects. But the first test that was made was on a rather calm day, and the smoke that was emitted from this tower hung over the valley the entire day, and not a bit of it got out of the 620-acre valley. And so this proved that for the most part, there would be very little danger of contamination, even should some get out. But by the time the experiment started, the government was dead sure that there would be no chance of contamination for anyone. And as a matter of fact, as you've probably seen in ads, there is less contamination that will arise from that atomic plant over there, which is now in full swing, than from your grandmother's apple pie. And this is literally true. All right. The area, Penn, was selected after an exhaustive study of all possible sites in the service area of the 15 companies involved. And by this time, it had grown to 17 companies. 2 additional companies had been added. And the reason for the selection was so that it would be of central location and therefore of promotional value, you might say, for all the 15 companies, which were going to have to justify the expenditures to their stockholders, as well as being located so near to the university at Fayetteville, the University of Arkansas, that it would be also useful to their scientific students, particularly their graduate students, and this has proved to be the case. But it was, one of the requirements was that it be on a railroad siding and as far from civilization as was practical, and on an area that could be cleared of all human habitation with the least difficulty. And there was a siding there, almost up to the site where we wanted, and there were only about 3 or 4 small sort of ramshackle farmhouses on the thing, which were immediately removed as soon as the site was acquired. And also, as you know, being 30 miles north of Fort Smith and 14 miles south and a little east of Fayetteville, it was pretty far removed from civilization, and so we got all the requirements for this particular site. Yeah. This does form a part of the national picture, and it is complementary with the Hanford experiment, which is an entirely different concept, and also of the other experiments that are going on throughout the United States. The idea was to avoid any duplication of other efforts in concept. But I forgot to mention that when this concept was arrived at and the contract was ready to be made with General Electric Company, it was determined that we could also get the Atomic Energy Commission financially interested in the thing, and the West German government had approached us with its nonprofit organization known as Gesellschaft für Kernforschung, and they agreed to put up $5 million, and between the Atomic Energy Associates, which was guaranteeing $5,600,000, and the Atomic Energy Commission and General Electric Company agreeing to foot the bill for any excess that might be required, we went ahead with the project. The initial project was estimated to cost $25 million, and the time was estimated to be 4 years experimentation after the thing became or went critical. Well, as most projects go, and not nearly as bad as governmental projects, I might add, the cost soon became apparently higher to the point it was going to cost about $27.5 million, which is going to actually turn out.
How about your relationships with the West German people, including your trips? I know that you had at least one board meeting over there.
Yes, that's true. As a matter of fact, we had, while I was the secretary of the organization, meetings at Karlsruhe, West Germany in 1963, 65, 67, and 69. And in the alternate years, we had our annual meeting in the United States, to which Dr. Schnur, Dr. Greifeld, and another representative or two of the West German government nonprofit organization came and met with us over here and observed the progress that was being made in the construction of the plant. And our experiences in Germany were most pleasant. They have a huge experimental laboratory concept on which they have 4 atomic plants now operating. And they are not this concept, and that's the reason they wanted in with us on this one, so that they would actually have 5 concepts going at the same time with the least expenditure of money. And this is, I think, highly important because it represents the first international comradeship in the attempt to explore the possibilities of nuclear fission. And it was proved to us in our trips over there that the German people, regardless of our experiences during the last war, are now our friends and certainly are as warm as any nationality that we were pleased to meet during any of our 4 trips, which encompassed all the European countries, incidentally. And I can say without hesitation that they are as friendly and warm as any nationality that we met.
The radio program over there, I believe, is Radio Free Europe, I believe.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that. I was asked by the assistant manager at Munich when we visited there to make a broadcast to the 5 Iron Curtain countries. It's Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, and there was one other that I don't think of now. But anyhow, there were 5. And then after I had made the broadcast, it was translated into those 5 different languages, and it was about a 23-minute program, and broadcast to each one of them. Romania, I think, was the other. And the thing that we stressed was that this was something that was done in the free world that would be given free of charge to any other free world nation without charge, as I mentioned, and therefore the advantages of nuclear energy were not going to be selfishly contained by the United States or West Germany or any other nation. We were going to give it with the idea that nuclear fuels will eventually, regardless of when, going to be exhausted, and it's going to have to depend on nuclear fission for its power in the future.
The Arkansas, I know, either Arkansas or that southern group has, I believe it's the southern group, has built an actual operating plant.
That is the Arkansas Power and Light. They have built a plant which I do not believe has yet gone into operation. I think it's just about to go into operation, but I have not seen that it has become operable as yet.
This is a little early, of course, coal costs are not high in Arkansas either. What's the reason for their building one this early?
Well, you stepped on a sore toe there. Oklahoma, particularly OG&E, has been able, through the organization of a gas company, to receive gas at the lowest cost of any place in the United States, and public service to a certain extent has done the same thing. But in Arkansas, where the gas producing and distributing company was the only source of their gas they could have without organizing their own company, they told them they were not really interested in supplying them gas wholesale at any price, but if they did, it would be such and such an amount per 1,000 BTU, and it was just so exorbitant that they could almost generate now by nuclear fission more cheaply than they could by buying the gas from that company over there, which shall remain nameless. However, that is the reason that we were able to get by as long as we have without a nuclear plant, and they were not. The concept is based on the fact that this plant will produce more fissionable fuel than it uses, and that is the reason it's called a breeder reactor. Basically, in producing the heat, and that's all that the difference between a nuclear plant and a conventional plant amounts to, the heat is produced by the fission of uranium atoms, and in the process, it's not perpetual motion, but it does result in the formation of thorium fissionable atoms that are even more fissionable than the uranium, and it's actually worked out in the experimentation so far, which has been going on now for about 1.5 years, that they have been producing more fissionable fuel than they have been using. And there are about 2.5 more years of experimentation to go. But if it continues at this rate and no difficulties arise from the future experimentation, it is anticipated that a 300,000 to a 500,000 kilowatt plant will be built, and the determination of who will own it or how it will be operated has not yet been determined. These are all legal matters that are very difficult to work out, but they've got 2.5 years to work it out. And now that it looks as if it is going to be what Glenn Seaborg said at the signing of the contracts, the most promising concept yet developed, and he is the man that's supposed to know more than anyone else about this in the United States. I think that this is going to go forward and will be worked out. Incidentally, at the signing of the contract, it was quite an affair. It was held at one of the rooms in the Shoreham Hotel, and all of the people there were interviewed, and I was there in the capacity of secretary, and I had to attest all the contracts. And of course, there had to be numerous copies for the four partners, that is the German government, the Southwest Atomic Energy Associates, the Atomic Energy Commission, and the General Electric Company. And then each company of the 17 companies in the SAEA also had to have their copies of the contracts, which they did. And they had television people there and radio people there and reporters, and they made quite an affair of it and gave us all little paperweights, General Electric did, as a souvenir of the signing ceremony. There also has been constructed at the entrance. Have you been there, by the way, Penn? Yes. As you know, there's been constructed a visitors gallery to which, without getting access to the plant itself, which must be done by permit only, any student or any person or any other people that happen to be by that way can go through the thing and see exactly what happens in mock-ups of the whole process. And the explanation, I think, for the layman is about as good as anything of that technical nature as I have ever seen. Also, I might mention that some of the graduate students from University of Arkansas are now putting in time down there, actually getting first-hand information as to the operation of the plant, which I think will be of great value to them and to the state and the area during the years to come, because there are no books written on how to operate a nuclear plant, because like we have in our power plants, because there weren't such things up until just a very few years ago. And so this is really a pioneering effort on everybody's part that's taking part in it.
If you produce more than you use, what keeps you from getting up to your neck in atoms?
Well, as I mentioned, it's about 102%, and you're not going to get up to your neck in atoms with that. Actually, with the usage doubling every 10 years, you can see that a 2% increase in production is not going to take care of that, and so you will have to keep mining uranium to initially fuel these plants. It is, however, on this concept that Glenn Seaborg, who, as you know, is the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, said that he feels that this is the answer to humanity's need and requirement for power in future years. When I mentioned that General Electric and the Atomic Energy Commission agreed to pick up the excess costs on the tab, this is not as lopsided as it might think, because the members of the 17 operating companies actually did all the legwork and all the planning and handled all the details and made all the go-between arrangements in the entire thing. And so actually their expenditures of energy and manpower cannot be measured in dollars and cents. And the 17 companies have certainly picked up their part of the load. And so I didn't want to leave the impression that we were derelict in our duty in that respect. As I mentioned, it has proved itself to be a real breeder reactor, and the physics calculations were just a little bit less optimistic than the year and a half experimentation has proved so far. And as I mentioned, in my opinion, at the end of this experimentation period, there will be a large nuclear plant built, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does prove to be the ultimate basic concept for nuclear fission in the United States as well as Germany and the other parts of the world.
This is a prediction, of course, but what's its chance of being built in Oklahoma?
My guess is that the first nuclear plant operating will be built in Arkansas on that 620-acre site, because we've got all the releases and all the clearances that are necessary over there, and that would be the ideal place to build it. I didn't mention also, and I should have, that this plant has the capacity of 20,000 kilowatts in comparison with a 300 to 500,000 actually operating plant. But the heat that's developed from this fission is actually just exhausted into the atmosphere and is not used at all. It's just there's no object in going to the expense of all this expensive equipment and generating. The thing that you do is to prove that you can produce the heat, and the rest is the same process as in any steam plant. It just produces the steam and turns the turbine.
Why does this experimentation take so long?
Well, there are a number of reasons. As they go along, they not only want to test the ability to produce the heat, but also safety factors have to be guaranteed to the government before they will let a full-scale plant be built. Also, the ability to withdraw the fuel, reprocess it, and refuel the machine has to be demonstrated before anybody would go ahead and put his money in a full-scale plant. And this is being done. These objects are being done, and so far with great satisfaction.
Do you think of any items of maybe human interest that you know about or observed or such dealing with with this relationship, or with visitors and their attitudes towards it?
Yes, there's an entire absence of fear by any visitors that we have ever had down there, to my knowledge. And I think I must give credit to the thorough investigation by the government for this. Also, there has been no complaint of any person in the area since we started. There's been no even suggestion of a suit of any kind, and there has never been a problem during this entire period of any kind as to escape of any of the fissionable material. And I think that is a credit not only to the government's experimentation, but also to General Electric's development of a plan that can be carried out without any danger to its employees or the surrounding people.
Rolland, you were with OG&E how many years?
43.
43 years, and all of this was in the accounting department, and a great deal of this, probably most of it, was in the Treasury Department, and the last several years as treasurer, and then later as financial vice president. You've seen the financing of the company over the period of years and the growth of the company over the years. I wonder, to begin with, if you would talk about how the company, what its financing problems were, and of course it was under holding company in those early days, were in the very earliest days. What were the financial problems involved? Anything you can reminisce either from your personal experience or from your historical knowledge there?
Well, Penn, actually, Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, as it is known today, is sort of a combination of a number of many companies which were purchased and accumulated by H.M. Billsby Management Corporation for Standard Gas and Electric Company, which was the holding company of all of the OG&E properties. My first association and first interest in OG&E took place several years before I actually went to work for them. I was working after school at a creamery in Muskogee when I first heard anything about OG&E. At that time, and it was 1920, the Muskogee Gas and Electric Company was the company which served both gas and electricity to Muskogee and a couple of the surrounding towns. Fort Gibson was one of them. And I was approached by the cashier, whom I knew, having played in a dance band with him at that time, the first band I'd ever played with, to buy a share of OG&E stock. And I asked him what OG&E stock was. It was 7% stock, and he told me that it was the company that actually operated Muskogee Gas and Electric Company under a contract. And so I remember both my brother and I bought a share of 7% stock of OG&E before I had any idea that I would ever go to work, because that was before I had ever gone to college. And then in 1925, on March 1st, OG&E took over actual ownership rather than operating Muskogee Gas and Electric Company under contract. And incidentally, then just a year later, in 1926, I went to work for them, coming right out of school. I remember Carl Tummel, you probably remember him, hired me, and he told me that if I would come to work as a meter reader, he would give me the first inside job that opened up, which he honestly did, and it wasn't too long. Incidentally, would it be interesting to compare the safety regulations? Well, as a meter reader, I had to read both the gas and electric meters, and in those days, the gas meter was located usually at the front of the house, under the house, and you had to crawl under the house clear to the end and then back again, and then the electric meter might be in the kitchen cabinet or in the bathroom closet or some other easily accessible place. But one day I was walking my meter route and had passed an open garage and was about to go up on the back door of the next door house to read the meter, and suddenly something hit me on the back, and it was a bird dog, an old bitch that had a litter of pups out there in the garage, and I hadn't even seen her, but she hit me, tore my shirt and my skivvies, and brought the blood down my back. And so I was almost through with my book, so I finished it and went on in. And I remember that the credit manager, who also supervised the meter readers, took a look at it, and he said, well, it's 10 minutes of 5, and I think you might as well go home. You don't have to come back to work till tomorrow. Well, now that was the attitude in those days, and anymore, if a meter reader had come in with a dog bite today, he would be sent immediately to the doctor for examination and probably for rabies shots if they could not locate the dog. But anyhow, there wasn't any consideration at that time. I can also remember that on the meter at Bacone College, you had to get up, take your pickup truck out there, climb up on the cab, and you could reach the first pole steps and climb up and look around the transformer, and they had a pole meter at the top of the pole. Anymore, they wouldn't let a meter reader think of doing that. And then at some of the hotels, you had a choice of climbing up the fire escape on the roof and going down into the elevator shaft, or riding the elevator, top of the elevator, up to the top of the shaft and reading the meter. I always climbed the fire escape myself.
I scrounged a meter from the for the new Heritage Building, which I put out there last year, which is a commercial meter with a coin slot in it. Tell us about that.
Well, Those were meters that were designed to give the customer just the amount of energy that he wanted to take as long as his money would hold out. And then when the meter had gone a certain distance, well, the meter cut off and he had to put another quarter in the meter, the lights went out. And the same thing was true with gas meters. They had the old quarter gas meters too. There were ways of putting slugs in the thing, as we found out, but there wasn't too much of that really. But there were ways of beating the thing just the same as there are ways of slowing the meter down today, and also of taking them off and turning them upside down. People are going to find some way of beating it if they want to, almost anything you try to do.
If it's slugged, you know who slugged it because you know whose meter it is.
That's right. You could always tell, but lots of times the people would be gone. People that would do that would probably be shiftless and be gone before you ever get around to checking the meters.
I had heard that the story told that there were times when they had to go out and empty the meters to make a payroll.
This is true. That's right, and that's these were back in the days when the Muskogee Gas and Electric Company was being operated under lease agreement by Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company. But this is really true, and I can also remember times, particularly during the Depression, which I'll talk about in just a minute, that we sometimes had to wait a day or two on our checks before they came from Oklahoma City to be sure that they would be covered by the time the deposits from the receipts had been made. Things were a lot rougher than most people now have any idea. I might also say that when I came to work, the OG&E Club accommodated both the women and the men of the company, and they had a meeting every month, and at those they had programs that were put on entirely by the members of the men and the women's organization. Later then, about 2 years later, they split it up in about 1928 and formed what they called the Women's Committee, and then the Men's Club was developed, which turned into usually a talk by some well-known person, and then the customary games afterwards, and then with a beer bust about once a year. But originally it was all one organization.
I want to get a little into the growth of the company and how these varied companies came together, first through the holding company and then eventually in the OG&E. Did you?
Well, as I mentioned before, the company is composed of a good many individual companies and small groups of companies. For example, Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company, as we now know it today, is composed of Muskogee Gas and Electric Company and the Sapulpa Gas and Electric Company, the Enid Electric and Gas Company, the El Reno Gas and Electric Company, the Consumers Power Company, which was Ardmore and that group of companies down there, and the Southern Oklahoma Power Company, which was Shawnee and the oil fields and the companies around there, all of which were acquired roughly during the period of from 1923 to 1928, those 5 years. Later, of course, we took on such companies as Woodward, which was purchased in 1936, and incidentally, that was the first company that was purchased after the Federal Power Commission issued its regulations and took complete control of all the operating companies throughout the United States. And that was the first report that we made of a purchased property after we became subservient to the Federal Power Commission, or the FPC as it was known. And I will never forget their questioning us about what we had put into cost and so forth. And incidentally, in effective 1936, I believe it was, 36 or 7, the Federal Power Commission classification of accounts came into effect. And Mr. Kennedy and several of the other division auditors had been assigned by Mr. Lester to make a study of these things and determine how we would be able to apply them and to transfer our accounts from the old state classification, the EU and the GU. It was the EU by that time, electric utility accounts of the Corporation Commission of the state of Oklahoma, and to transfer them into the new classification of the Federal Power Commission. And fortunately, both the Oklahoma and the Arkansas commissions agreed to adopt substantially the accounts that had been prescribed by the Federal Power Commission, so we did not have to keep a duplicate set of accounts as we had been afraid we might have to be at first. The original cost was one of the first requirements of the Federal Power Commission, which meant that we had to go back and dig out the original cost, not to OG&E, but to the person that first devoted the property to the electric service. Now, this was a very bad requirement because, as you can realize, for example, we had bought the site of the operating headquarters over at Muskogee from a man named Fred Turner in about 1904, and he was the first man who had devoted it to the use of electric power because he had a little generating station which served a few accounts there, and that was the first one that devoted it, and so that was the cost you had to use. As I recall, we paid $20,000 for it, and when we went with the Power Commission to look at it, and they took a look at the territory and the location, they said very frankly that it could not be purchased for $150,000, but even so, they were going to make us write off the difference between what we had on the books, which I believe was $100,000, and the $20,000 because they didn't subscribe to their rules. They just said, sorry, that's the way it is. And this was true in a good many other instances. What they were particularly interested in was the watering of accounts and to get more leverage in companies that had been resorted to by a number of the companies. And my job was, after the accounts had been entirely reconciled and all the original costs had been pulled out and then the differences had been pulled out, as to electric plant acquisition adjustment and electric plant adjustment. Now, the electric plant acquisition adjustment was the difference between the appraisals that had been put on it and the value at which, like this Fred Turner thing I told you about, were resulted in ridiculously low costs, and the true value of the property as we saw it. We had to write that off over a period of, I think it was 6 or 7 years. And the electric plant acquisition adjustment was just things that they just denied were a part of the cost, the attorney's fees and so forth, and we just had to write them off immediately. But anyway, in 1940, then the Federal Power Commission came around with its examiners, and I just lost a year of my life because I just had to, what you might call, wet nurse them. Right through that year, I was with them day and night and whenever they wanted me. It finally resulted in their accepting a good deal of our work, and they contested our appraisal on 2 or 3 of the properties, notably El Reno, Enid, and Fort Smith, Arkansas, and Muskogee. And they said that they didn't believe that that was true cost, and we asked them what they wanted to do, and they said, well, you've got your books here, but you don't have any detail for it. And I said, yeah, that's right. And Mr. Kennedy finally said, well, why don't you, Larry Nash is the name of the chief there, and Rolland, take the general ledgers of those 4 companies and pull down what you consider to be the top figures, the allowable figures on each 4 of those companies. So we did it for El Reno and Enid, independent of one another, and when we came out, we differed on El Reno. I think it was only about $8,000, and that was an item that was really in controversy. And in Enid, it was even less than that. I think it was about $3,000 or $4,000.
And so they agreed then that the top books were a pretty reliable thing, but they would have to have some kind of detail. So we took them over to Muskogee and to Fort Smith both, and it was in the middle of August in one of the hottest years I've ever seen. In fact, the tar was streaming down from the roof of the Muskogee warehouse where the old records were located, and I went down and found them for them and all the vouchers, and said, here they are. And they said, good Lord, we're not going to have to work here, are we? We all were stripped down to our undershirts, and I said, no, we'll go downstairs. We had fans down in the office, and it was reasonably cool down there, and that's where they worked during the whole period. Well, since you asked about bookkeeping, I might tell you that when I first came to work, they were using a system of billing that was absolutely ridiculous. It was on a flat bed that had a sort of a typewriter arrangement, and they typed out the bills on another long sheet of paper, and that was the old Elliott Fisher machine. And they were still keeping their meter record in a large, cumbersome book, and the customer's deposits was in a thing that was absolutely ridiculous. You could hardly carry the book to your desk to work on. Later, we went to the bureaus, which was a great improvement, but that would not nearly do the job. And in 1947, we went to what they call punch card accounting, and that was IBM equipment, in which we cut over, first of all our accounts receivable. And truly, as you know, we put 6 stories additional on the building there in about 1957. And if we had not gone to machine accounting, what they call punch EDP, electronic data processing, we would have had to house that, to fill that entire additional 6 floors with accounting departments just for the customer's records. So you could not get by without it. The growth of the company had been so rapid. Then in about 61, we went to the magnetic tape, and that is the system we are on now. And instead of having a whole bunch of cards around, they have tapes just such as the one that we're using here, and they can get a whole record of the customer's billing for the entire month on several of these reels. I don't know how many really, but more important and more extraordinary to me is the fact that the customer service department down on the 7th floor, when they get a request from a customer for some information, can punch a little dial on their desk and get before them on a screen, just like a television screen, all the information that's pertinent to that particular customer. So really, it is a miraculous improvement. As I say, had we not gone to that system, we would have just had to have a separate building for the accounting facility.
I understand you got one man's, one customer's complete record on about an inch and a half of.
I understand that's right, although I've not verified. I believe you're right on that.
That's right. Which means that many thousand on one page this size.
That's right.
I'd like to talk a little about the personalities of those juniors, particularly going way back, thinking in terms of those who played what you consider to be real key roles in some phase of OG, not necessarily based upon the position, but upon the role they played.
Well, the first 2 names I can remember after coming to work for OG&E were J.F. Owens and W.R. Emerson. Mr. Owens, at the time I came to work, was vice president, and that was all, because the president lived in Chicago, being also an employee of Standard Gas Electric Company, the holding company, John D. O'Brien. And Mr. Emerson was, at that time, an assistant treasurer, and very shortly after that became treasurer. And the report is that Mr. Emerson worked his way up from a ditch digger and he could shave the size of the ditch more accurately and more painstakingly than any other man on the crew, and he finally worked up to his position, not through any pull or not through any education, because he had none, but through hard work and actual application of the job. And incidentally, during World War I, he was asked to go to Washington as a $1 a year man, and did so, and did so with great distinction. And he's the only man in OG&E that I know of that ever served as a $1 a year man in Washington. Another man that you...
Didn't know the town. Didn't know the town.
Well, now, I think, no, I don't think he was a $1 a year man. He might have been. Otis might have been a
He was
$1.
on loan 1 year.
Yeah, he was on loan, that's right. That's true. Another man that I heard about shortly after that was Mr. Frank J. Meyer, who at that time was in the engineering department of Oklahoma City and rapidly developed into manager of distribution, transmission, distribution, and then shortly thereafter was made vice president in charge of operations of the company. When Mr. Meyer died here several years ago, I have the date here someplace, I don't think it's too important, he marked the end of an era because he was the last remaining original employee of OG&E at the time he died. As a matter of fact, he went to work for OG&E before it was OG&E. He went to work in 1899, I believe it was, as Oklahoma Power District Water Company, which was absorbed by Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company in this combination of companies that I mentioned. And so he actually was an employee of OG&E 3 years before it actually was organized in 1902.
And he started climbing poles too, didn't he?
That's right. He started climbing poles and wiping generating equipment. They had what they called wipers, and he did that. He did everything else conceivable in the plant. He went up the hard way too, although he did have university education in electrical engineering. Another man I remember, and he's very close to me, was Mr. B.N. Lester, and he was quite a remarkable man. He was another man that had never had a university education, but had been a prolific reader. In fact, he would, like they told about Abraham Lincoln, would walk miles to borrow books and educated himself, and without any hesitation I can say that he was as well educated as any university man I ever knew. He was a born accountant and financial and figure organizer. And he's the one that organized and successfully provided the Federal Power Commission classification of original cost to the FPC. Mr. Lester died a very sad death of cancer, and it was when he became ill that Mr. Kennedy was transferred to Oklahoma City from Muskogee, from which I'd come in 2 years before, 1938. 1940, Mr. Kennedy was transferred over as an assistant treasurer, and then when Mr. Lester died on Christmas Eve of the following year, 1941, Mr. Kennedy was just the natural. He was just in the right place to take over the financial job of the company and proved to be quite a financial genius. He picked up right where Mr. Lester went off and did a marvelous financial job. It was through Mr. Kennedy that I was able to learn what I did. I had worked for him in Muskogee for 10 years, and then after he came over there, I worked either for or with him during the rest of my entire career with the company. And through him and through trips to New York, in Wall Street, and that's a place that you do a lot more walking than you have any idea. Up and down the street and meeting the various analysts and the financial people, I got quite a comprehensive idea of what makes the financial world turn.
You look at the index, you know where
That's right. Another personality who will long be remembered was Mr. George A. Davis, who during World War II was the head of the, what did you call it? The military department for the state, as well as being the president of the company and the chairman of the board. And one little incident I might tell you about Mr. Davis, it may not be generally known, but when the war came on, there just wasn't manpower to fill the jobs, and the company's employment fell about 400 to 450 people. And of course, workers were scarce, and the job that Glenn Cartwright had been doing as my assistant on the hospitalization and retirement record was assumed by well, a little Jewess, the only one that I ever knew of that worked for the company. We had one Jewish man, but she got the idea that she wanted to get married, and we had a rule at that time against married women continuing service with the company. And she made a plea to Mr. Davis, General Davis, in written form, and didn't get any place, and then she went up to see him. And finally she told him, in no uncertain terms, what she thought of him or any other company that would not permit a woman to work after she got through, after she got married. And I suppose this is one of the forerunners of the women's lib. But anyhow, Mr. Davis just ignored her, and she burst into tears and left his office. And he came down to me and said, what do you know about and said, what do you know about this girl? And I said, well, she's doing a very credible job for me, but I don't understand what you mean. He said, well, can we do without her? And I said, well, we can do without anybody, Mr. Davis. And he said, well, I am going to fire her then because she has been unreasonable and insulting, and in a wartime I just cannot permit that. So he did just let her go on the spot, and it's pretty rough on me, but that was his way of doing things. If somebody didn't cut the bug, why, he was ready to let him go right now if there's any possible way of doing it. Another man who made his mark in the company was a man named Paul Hoheizel, who had originated in Colorado as a miner. And he was very ambitious and very scholarly, although he had no formal education. And he came to OG&E and initially started out as in the accounting department. And I remember that he and several other members came over to make an audit of Muskogee during my first 2 or 3 years with the company. Later he became interested in sales and became a part of the sales department, and this intrigued him with the advertisements that the sales department were putting out to the advertising field itself, and finally was made, upon the death of his predecessor, the advertising manager for the company, in which capacity he served up until the time of his retirement in a very capable manner. He was a very novel man, and always productions. I remember he wrote
column in the meter, the house organ, called the Chanticleer, which was widely read by members of the company. How much?
Go ahead.
Another interesting thing was the company's experiences during the Depression. In 1932, I believe it was, the Depression had finally made inroads into Oklahoma and Oklahoma City particularly. The oil industry had prevented its being felt nearly as hard as it was on either the Pacific coast or the East Coast particularly, but finally it got down to the point where the earnings were less than would be satisfactory to financial people, and so reluctantly everybody in the company from top to bottom took a 10% wage cut in 1930.